I've got a lot of questions from all over the world about a lot of different things, and so I weave certain issues in a certain way to respond to certain inquiries, leaving the rest maybe for the Q&A session. But what we mean by the Usuli method is that any approach to Islam must be founded on basic organizing ethical principles. That you cannot understand Tawheed unless you understand the ethics of Tawheed. And that you cannot practice Tawheed monotheism unless you also practice the ethics of Tawheed. And that you cannot move on to rituals, ibadat, without understanding the ethics that are upheld by ibadat. And that there is that the presence of Allah, the recognition of the presence of Allah in our life, is nothing short of recognizing the meaning of life itself. That's why we call it the Usuli method. Usuli means foundational method. It is a method that builds from bottom up. That you cannot, as is followed by the Wahhabi methodology, concern yourself with the minutiae of practice unless you have internalized first the ethics that practice is designed to reinforce and to uphold. So it's like restructuring the psychology and the morality of a Muslim, and not just a Muslim, but a human being. And that this systematic approach to belief and morality, and in fact faith, because Islam, when Islamophobes say Islam is not a religion, it's an ideology because it's a way of life, well, they politicize and demonize something that they don't want to understand. Islam is a way of life in the sense that any religion that is worth the word being called a religion is a way of life. A religion that imposes laws, but the laws come as basically a function of ritualism without meaning, becomes, like Wahhabism, risks losing the meaning of the word religion, because you perform certain acts of ritual, but you don't understand why they're there. In what way do they contribute to your relationship to your God? In what ways do they contribute to your relationship to yourself? And in what ways do they contribute to your relationship to other human beings? And if you ask the vast majority of Muslims in our world today, is Salah, in what ways does Salah contribute to all these elements, your relationship to yourself, to other human beings, and to God? I'm not sure what answers they would give you, because of the absence of the Usuli method. Nothing in Islam is a result of either tribal ritual or tribal privilege. And what I mean by tribal is that a lot of religions basically embrace, or system of thought, a tribal attitude. We are privileged because we belong to this team. And as insignia of belonging to this team, we perform certain symbolic acts. Well, that's not Islam. In Islam, there is no tribalism, and there are no insignia, symbolic insignia of tribalism. There is meaning, there is ethics, there is virtue. And that is what, and again, I've been asked repeatedly to explain what Usuli means. And Usulis start with the assumption that it is impossible for us to be the create the Khalqullah, to be the creation of Allah, without that packing a world of meaning. Your relationship to the divine is earth-shattering, is universe-shattering. And it is our job to unpack the world of meaning that comes from our relationship to the divine. Now, of course, as the Quran says that the Prophet ﷺ will complain in the final day that his ummah has not paid enough attention to the Quran as they should have, which is something that we are seeing. The Quran itself is the kernel of the Usuli method, because in the Quran are layers of meaning that unpack that universe of ethics and virtue that we are talking about. Instead of speaking in abstractions, I will start with Surah Rahman. Now, keep in mind that when we talk about ethics and when we talk about unpacking the world of meaning between us and the divine, and when we talk orienting our moral vision as unfolding from our basic relationship to Allah and to the monotheistic belief, you must anchor this in the Quran. Surah Al-Rahman has been called by some scholars Arus al-Quran, or the bride of the Quran. What they mean by this, it's been attributed as a hadith, but it's clearly not a hadith, mudaf. It's simply an inherited saying by some scholars that was later on attributed to the Prophet ﷺ incorrectly in all likelihood. But nevertheless, Surah Al-Rahman, as you will see just from unpacking it, that it is one of these surah that are what we can call Kitab, the kernel of the Quran. The Quran itself has multi-layers of meaning. Now, I've been studying Surah Al-Rahman for my entire life, and I still don't claim that I have uncovered all its layers of meaning, and I won't by the time I leave this world, because many scholars before me have written. I was, in preparation for the Halaqa, I was reviewing the numerous tafsirs on Surah Al-Rahman, and just layers and layers and generations of insights built upon each other, and to sort of sum them up for you is a bit of a challenge, but I'll try my best. But my point is that the Quran itself, there are revelations in the Quran that address contextual unfoldings, contextual contingencies that took place at the time of the Prophet ﷺ and at the time of the Sahaba and Ahlul Bayt. Now, are these historically contingent, meaning that they have no significance for us? No, that doesn't follow. They're historically contingent, meaning that they teach us an example as to how to resolve problems that occur to the community. In other words, they're instructional by example, not directly, by example. So the law as to the testimony of women, or law as to inheritance of women. In Reasoning of God, I unpack this argument in full, so if you're interested, you can read what I write about this in Reasoning with God. the way that Allah legislated to deal with the historical circumstance that took place at the time is instructional, and it teaches a moral trajectory. Now, each word is chosen carefully, moral and trajectory. So if you're interested in what moral trajectory exactly means, again, read Reasoning with God. Because if we talk about it, we'll spend the entire time talking about what moral trajectory is. But there are verses in the Quran that revelation in the Quran that is instructional in terms of illustrating the moral trajectories of divine legislation. However, there are other types of revelation in the Quran that are not tied to historical contingencies and that unfold the nature of the relationship of human beings to the divine and the meaning of creation itself. And these surahs and ayat are not read within an instructional paradigm, but are read to unpack the treasures of meaning, kunuz al-ma'na, that are contained within them. And you will see how Surah Al-Rahman is a very good illustration of what we're talking about. It's as if the Quran in this kind of revelation addresses people with different layers of intellectual and spiritual sophistication, yielding different meanings to different people with different levels of intellectual and moral and ethical and spiritual insight. And again, Surah Al-Rahman is an excellent example of that. If you want to understand your relationship to Allah, read the Quran, read the Quran, read the Quran. Without the Quran, we are not the people of the book, and we are nothing. Someone wrote me, asked me, why am I critical of Shahab Ahmad's, my late friend, who passed away, book, What is Islam? Any approach to Islam that empties Islam of its religious core, of its dependency on revelation for meaning, any approach to Islam that tries to limit the production of meaning in Islam to some sociological or anthropological reality is a betrayal of Islam itself. Islam is not simply a sociological or anthropological manifestation. Islam is not simply what Muslims do or do not do. Any attempt to understand the meaning of Islam must recognize the role of revelation as at the heart of what the Islamic is. Islamic is. Unfortunately, many contemporary Muslims, because of the weakness of their relationship with the Quran, because they're intellectually and morally lazy, they don't want to study the Quran. And they much rather study either the anthropology of Muslims or the sociology of Muslims, or simply because they want to produce meaning on the basis of their mere whims, despite the fact the Quran has warned us time and time again, وَلَا تَغَرُّكُمُ الْأَمَانِ, do not let your subjective aspirations and assumptions, unstudied assumptions about the divine, lead you astray. Do not let it fool you, because if it does, you will have assumptions about what Allah is and is not that ultimately will fail you in the hereafter. When you show up in the hereafter and basically what you've worshipped your entire life are your own subjective whims, rather than any truth as revealed by revelation. So, again, the Quran is the heart of everything. The Quran is not a book of law. The Quran is a book of belief and ethics. And that is where, as Usulis, we start. We judge, even if, as I explained in Speaking in God's Name, another book I wrote, and I also explained it in Reasoning with God, we judge anything attributed to the Prophet ﷺ or the two companions or to Ahlul Bayt on the basis of the Quranic revelation. If it is inconsistent with what the Quran says, we do not accept it. Just as a sidebar. Okay.